The kingdom of Ekaneba was a land of rich beauty, blessed with fertile soil and vast forest. Its people were proud, and its king, Afolabi, was a man of legend. Tall, with piercing eyes that saw through deceit, he had ruled for nearly 30 years. Under his leadership, the kingdom had flourished. The river that ran through the heart of Ekaneba flowed with life, and the markets bustled with joy. But within the palace walls, beneath the perfect facade, a darkness festered. King Afolabi had always been a man of few words, his decisions wise, though often clouded by a subtle melancholy that only a select few noticed. His closest confidants whispered that he had never been the same since the day his first love, Oluwasian, was taken from him. Her kingdom had been burned to the ground in a raid, and the child they had together, a son, was thought lost forever. The king never spoke of Oluwasian or their son, but it was clear that the king's heart, though adorned with the mantle of a ruler, was torn in two. The people loved him for his justice, his fairness, and his military brilliance, but few knew of the battle within him. In the quiet corners of the palace, late at night, the king would often stand by his window, gazing out into the distance. His eyes would become distant, haunted by memories of a time he desperately wanted to forget. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, a man appeared at the gates of the palace. His name was Kofi. He was tall and striking, his face hardened by the weather and the weight of years. A warrior by his appearance, Kofi was quiet, with an air of mystery surrounding him. When the guards approached him, he spoke only of seeking shelter from the storm that was brewing in the distance. Despite his rough appearance, there was something about Kofi that unsettled the king. His eyes, dark, unwavering, reminded him of something he couldn't place, like a shadow lurking at the edge of his mind. The king, despite his unease, welcomed the stranger into his court. Kofi quickly became indispensable, his keen intellect and battle strategies winning the king's favor. His presence seemed to put everyone on edge, as though the air around him was charged with an unseen energy. The royal court grew suspicious of the stranger, some even murmuring that he was more than he seemed. But the king, who had grown tired of the whispers and rumors of his court, grew fond of Kofi. There was something about him, a quiet strength, a connection to the land that felt almost supernatural. The king, however, was not blind. He saw the way Kofi's eyes lingered when he was near, as if he were searching for something. As the weeks passed, tensions rose with the neighboring kingdom of Zahira, a long-standing rival. There had been skirmishes on the borders, and rumors of war hung in the air like a thick, suffocating fog. The king, worried about the rising unrest, began to withdraw into himself, becoming increasingly restless. Kofi, ever observant, noticed the king's growing unease and began to offer advice. He suggested strategies to fortify the borders, increase defenses, and recruit new warriors. But it wasn't just military advice that Kofi offered. Late at night, he would often find the king wandering the palace, his mind racing. In one of these moments, when the moon hung high above the kingdom, Kofi found the king staring out over the river, his face etched with fear. "Your Majesty," Kofi said, stepping into the king's presence. "The kingdom needs you. But I fear something else calls you." "What is it?" The king turned slowly, his eyes dark with an old pain. "There are things buried within me that this kingdom can never know. My past, it is a shadow I cannot outrun." Kofi watched him closely. "Your past?" he asked softly. "What happened to you, my king? Why do you fight so hard to forget?" The king's gaze hardened. "There is a price for power, Kofi. A cost that cannot be avoided. The day I took this throne, I lost my soul. And I may lose more than that in the days to come." That night, the king slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of fire, the cries of a child, and the face of a woman he had once loved. He awoke in a cold sweat, the haunting feeling of dread consuming him. The kingdom's enemies were closing in, and the tensions between Ekanleba and Zahira finally erupted into full-scale battle. The king summoned his generals and strategists to prepare for war. But even in the heat of impending conflict, a sinister presence lingered. Kofi's eyes became more intense, his words sharper. He spoke little of his past, and each time he was asked about it, he would change the subject, his discomfort palpable. Still, There was something familiar about him, a quality that gnawed at the king's mind. One night, as they sat together in the royal chamber, Kofi suddenly broke the silence. "There are things you must know, King Afolabi. The kingdom is in danger, not from your enemies, but from the weight of your own heart." The king, already burdened by the weight of his responsibility, looked up at him sharply. "What are you saying, Kofi?" Kofi's voice was barely above a whisper. "The prophecy, it is coming true. The child you abandoned has returned. He is here, in your court, and he will either save this kingdom or destroy it." The king's heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about?" Kofi stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the king's face. "I am the son you left behind, the son of Oluwazian." The room fell silent as the weight of Kofi's words sank in. The king stumbled back, his face pale, his heart racing. He could barely breathe, the air suddenly thick with the crushing weight of guilt. "No," the king whispered. "It can't be. You're lying." But Kofi's expression remained unchanged, his gaze steady. "I am not lying. I was the child you abandoned, the child you thought was lost. I survived the fire, I lived in hiding, and I have come to claim what is rightfully mine." The king felt his knees buckle beneath him, the weight of the past crashing down on him. He had thought the child was dead. He had buried the memory, locked it away. And now, the son he had forsaken was standing before him, revealing a truth the king could no longer escape. Kofi stepped back, his eyes now filled with sorrow, but also with a strange, unsettling determination. "The kingdom is doomed, father. You have neglected your own blood, and now you must pay the price." The king's head swam with disbelief and shame. But before he could respond, the sounds of battle reached their ears. War had come to their doorstep. The kingdom was in flames. The battle was raging outside the palace walls, and King Afolabi was faced with a choice that would determine the fate of his kingdom and his son. "I have failed you," the king whispered, his voice breaking. "I failed you both. I failed your mother. But I will not fail this kingdom." Kofi's eyes softened for a moment, but then they hardened once more. "You may have failed me, but the kingdom still needs you. And it needs me, too. The prophecy is clear. I must either save this kingdom or watch it burn." In that moment, the king knew that the only way to save Akanleba was to pass on the crown, to hand over the legacy of the throne to his son. But doing so would mean he would have to relinquish everything he had fought for. His entire life had been spent building a kingdom, and yet it would all slip through his fingers. Kofi, however, could not bring himself to accept the throne from a man he had never known as a father. He could not reconcile the blood of his past with the man who had abandoned him. In a final act of defiance, Kofi disappeared into the night, leaving the kingdom to crumble beneath the weight of its own lies. The king, shattered by the loss of both his son and his kingdom, died alone in the ruins of Akanleba, his legacy reduced to ash. Years passed, and the kingdom of Akanleba fell into ruin. The river that had once brought life to the kingdom now flowed dark and stagnant, a reminder of the lost days. The people spoke of a king who had given everything, but who had lost it all in the end. And somewhere in the shadows of the kingdom, the ghost of a son haunted the land, a silent figure walking alone, forever burdened by the sins of his father.